In the frozen fjords of Norway, where ancient gods still whisper through howling winds, a shield maiden faces her greatest battle alone. As midnight storm clouds gather, she watches helplessly from the shoreline as angry waves claim her husband's longship, leaving her with child in their isolated homestead. The aurora dances across the winter sky, casting ethereal light through her window as labor pains begin. Without a midwife's guidance, she must draw upon the strength of her ancestors, their voices carried on the bitter wind. Her newborn's first cry mingles with the storm's fury, a sound that will echo through the sagas for generations to come. But in these treacherous waters, where every dawn brings new dangers, can a lone mother protect both her child and her husband's legacy? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The silver arm ring caught the firelight as Astrid traced its intricate patterns with weathered fingers. Each rune told a story, not just of her binding to Erik, but of the path that had led her to become the woman she was. The bracelet had been his final gift before the storm, though neither of them knew it then. She had earned her place among the shield maidens in the summer of her 16th year, when most girls were already promised in marriage. But Astrid's father, the village weapon master, had seen something different in his only daughter. "Some are born to tend the hearth," he would say, calloused hands adjusting her grip on the sword, "and some are born to defend it." Those early morning training sessions shaped her body and spirit. While other young women learned to weave fine cloth, Astrid learned to weave patterns of steel in the air, her blades singing with each precise movement. The other villagers whispered, of course, a woman warrior was still rare enough to draw sideways glances and worried murmurs. But her father's reputation silenced most critics, and Astrid's own growing skill quieted the rest. It was during the autumn raids that she first met Erik. Unlike the others, he didn't scoff at the sight of a woman in warrior's garb. Instead, he watched her practice with quiet interest, his deep-set eyes following each movement with understanding. He was different from the young raiders who boasted loudly in the mead hall. Erik's strength lay in his stillness, in the way he could read the sea and sky like others read runes. "Your blade moves like water," he told her one evening as she finished her practice, "flowing, yet with hidden force." His words carried no mockery, only honest appreciation. That was the moment she first saw him truly, not just as another warrior, but as a man who could see beyond the surface of things. Their courtship was as unconventional as their first meeting. While other men brought their intendeds fine cloths and jewelry, Erik taught Astrid the secrets of navigation by the stars. Together they would sit on the high cliffs, his strong hands guiding hers as he showed her how to use the sextant. "The sea is a harsh mistress," he would say, "but she rewards those who learn her ways." The wedding bracelet had been his masterwork, commissioned from the finest silversmith in 3 villages. Each rune was chosen with care: strength, protection, fertility, love. But it was the hidden rune, tucked away where only she would know to look, that moved her most: freedom. For Erik understood that in binding herself to him, she wasn't diminishing her warrior's spirit, but gaining an ally who would help it soar. Now, as she sat alone in their longhouse, the bracelet seemed to pulse with remembered warmth. 5 years of marriage had only strengthened their bond, each challenge faced together making them stronger. They had weathered raids and harsh winters, celebrated bountiful harvests and successful voyages. The child growing within her was to be the culmination of their shared path, a new life forged from their union of strength and wisdom. The last morning replayed in her mind with cruel clarity. Erik's careful checking of his gear, his gentle kiss on her swollen belly, his promise to return before the birth. "The trading voyage is routine," he had assured her, "just like dozens before." But something in the air had felt different that day, a heaviness that even the most experienced sailors had missed. Astrid's fingers tightened around the silver band, its edges pressing into her palm. She was both now, warrior and widow, mother-to-be, and lone survivor. The bracelet would serve as her tether to Eric, to the love that had shaped her life. But it would also remind her of the strength he had always seen in her, the power that she would need more than ever in the days to come. The old compass lay heavy in Eric's hands that final morning, its brass case dulled by generations of seafaring. Thumbs. It had guided his grandfather through the treacherous northern waters, led his father to rich trading routes, and now served as Eric's most trusted companion at sea. The needle trembled slightly, a detail that should have given him pause. Had the promise of profit not clouded his judgment? "The markets in Hedeby are desperate for furs," he explained, checking the compass readings against the position of the wan winter sun. "With half the trading ships already in winter harbor, our goods will fetch triple their usual price." His weathered fingers traced the route on a worn map spread across their table, the same familiar gesture Astrid had watched 100 times before. She stood in the doorway of their longhouse, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other clutching a bundle of dried herbs meant to ward off seasickness. The morning air bit with unusual sharpness, carrying the metallic taste of snow yet to fall. In the harbor below, Eric's crew made final preparations, their breath forming clouds in the pre-dawn gloom. "The babe isn't due for another month," Eric continued, mistaking her silence for worry about the birth. "I'll be back with a hold full of silver before your time comes." He tucked the compass into its leather pouch with practiced care, the motion as familiar as a prayer. But Astrid's concern ran deeper than the timing. She had watched the sea her entire life, learned its moods as intimately as any sailor. Something felt wrong in the air, in the way the waves clutched at the shore with desperate fingers. The ravens had been restless too, wheeling above the fjord in uncertain patterns that defied their usual habits. "The wind speaks with two tongues today," she said finally, voicing only the smallest part of her unease. As a shield maiden, she had learned to trust such instincts. As a wife, she struggled to find the right words to express them. Eric paused. In his preparations, reading the deeper meaning in her tone, he crossed to her in 2 long strides, strong arms enfolding her in an embrace that smelled of leather and pine tar. "The compass has never led us astray," he murmured into her hair. "One quick voyage, and we'll have enough to see our child through 3 winters." She wanted to argue, to tell him about the dreams that had plagued her sleep, dark waters and splintering wood, the cry of gulls that sounded too much like morning. But she knew the look in his eyes, the one that meant his mind was set upon a course as surely as his compass pointed north. Instead, she pressed a small pouch into his hands, filled with the protective herbs she had gathered under the full moon. "May Thor guard your arm and Njord calm the seas," she whispered, the traditional blessing feeling hollow in her throat. The crew was calling now, their voices carrying up from the harbor on the strengthening wind. Eric kissed her once more, his hand lingering on her belly before gathering his gear. The compass bounced gently against his hip as he made his way down the path, its brass case catching the first weak rays of sunrise. Astrid watched from the doorway as the crew cast off, their long oars cutting into the slate-grey water with practiced precision. The compass would guide them south, through the treacherous channels and past the hidden reefs. It had never failed before, this ancient tool passed down through Eric's bloodline. But as the sail caught the wind and the ship diminished against the horizon, she noticed something that sent a chill through her deeper than any winter wind. The ravens, those sacred birds of Odin that always accompanied trading ships in hope of food, were circling back to shore. In all her years of watching ships depart, she had never seen the ravens abandon a voyage before it began. She stood at the doorway long after the ship had disappeared, one hand still pressed to her belly, feeling the child move within as if sharing her unease. The compass would guide Eric through the channels and past the reefs, but some dangers couldn't be marked on any chart or measured by any instrument. Some dangers could only be felt in the bones, in the way the wind changed its song to a hollow keening that spoke of loss to come. The storm came with unnatural swiftness, as if Ran herself, goddess of the drowning depths, had called it forth. With malicious intent, Astrid stood at the cliff's edge, her cloak whipping violently in the wind, watching Eric's ship battle against waves that rose like dark mountains in the growing gloom. The first lightning bolt illuminated the scene in harsh white clarity, the longship's sails straining against the mast, the crew struggling at the oars, the prow rising at an impossible angle before plunging into the next trough. In that frozen moment, she could see Eric at the stern, his familiar silhouette bent over, the steering oar fighting to keep the vessel from broaching. Between the thunderclaps, she heard the sharp crack of splitting wood. The sound carried across the water with terrible clarity, rising above the storm's fury like a death knell. The mast, unable to bear the strain, had given way. In the next flash of lightning, she saw it topple, taking with it any hope of controlling the ship's course. Local fishermen had gathered on the beach below, their own vessels secured against the storm. They shouted and gestured, but their words were torn away by the wind. Not that it mattered, no ship could launch in such conditions. Any rescue attempt would only add more souls to the sea's hungry maw. Through sheets of stinging rain, Astrid watched the longship driven inexorably toward the jagged rocks that lined the fjord's northern shore. Eric would know they were there, had known these waters since childhood, but without sail or steering way, knowledge meant nothing. The ship was now just another piece of flotsam in the storm's grasp. The end came with brutal suddenness. A massive wave lifted the vessel high, silhouetting it against the iron-grey sky, then drove it down with crushing force. The sound of splintering. Timbers carried across the water like the death cry of some mighty beast. When the wave receded, only scattered pieces of the ship remained visible in the churning foam. Astrid's warrior training had taught her to stand firm in the face of death, but nothing had prepared her for this helpless witnessing. Her legs gave way, and she fell to her knees in the mud, one hand clutching her belly where Eric's child stirred restlessly, as if sensing its father's fate. Hours passed, marked only by the gradual slackening of the wind and the slow recession of the storm clouds northward. As dawn's first pale light crept over the horizon, Astrid made her way down to the beach, moving with the careful deliberation of one in a dream. The tide had begun to ebb, leaving a scatter of debris along the shoreline. Among the seaweed and shattered planks, she found it, a piece of the ship's hull, still bearing the distinctive notched pattern that Eric had carved as his maker's mark. The wood, though sodden, was smooth beneath her fingers, polished by years of salt spray and careful maintenance. She ran her hand along the grain, remembering how often she had watched Eric do the same, checking for signs of wear or weakness. The timber had split diagonally, its edges splintered and raw, revealing the pale heartwood beneath the weathered surface. Like her own heart, she thought, torn open to expose what lay beneath its protective shell. She gathered the piece into her arms, this last tangible remnant of her husband's ship, of the life they had built together. Around her, villagers combed the beach, searching for survivors or bodies, though they all knew the sea rarely gave up what it claimed. Their quiet movements and murmured conversations created a gentle counterpoint to the waves that still crashed. Against the shore, now deceptively peaceful in the growing light, the piece of timber would find a place above their hearth, Astrid decided, where the smoke would gradually blacken it, where it would serve as both memorial and reminder. Their child would grow up knowing not just how its father died, but how he lived, a man who read the sea's moods and carved his mark upon its waves, until the day the waves carved their final mark upon him. The longhouse stood silent but for the crackling of the hearth fire, its shadows stretching long and dark across empty spaces that had never seemed so vast before. Astrid knelt before the central hearthstone, its ancient surface worn smooth by generations of her husband's family. The stone had witnessed countless births and deaths, celebrations and sorrows, its heat warming the hall through hundreds of winters. Now it offered what comfort it could to a widow who was not yet ready to bear that title. The heat seeped into her bones as she added another log, watching the flames dance across the stone's weathered surface. Here, Eric had laid the first fire of their marriage, speaking the old words that bound their lives to the hearth and to each other. Here, they had planned their future, dreamed of the children they would raise. The first cramp took her by surprise, a tight band of discomfort across her lower back. Too soon, she thought, pressing one hand against the rough warmth of the hearthstone to steady herself. The babe wasn't due for weeks yet, but her body, already stressed by grief and exhaustion, seemed to have other plans. She forced herself to breathe slowly, counting the breaths as she had been taught in her warrior training. Pain was a messenger, her old weapons master used to say, but you didn't have to let it control you. The cramp eased, leaving behind a dull ache and a growing sense of urgency. The practical tasks of preparation helped hold the grief at bay. She moved through the longhouse with deliberate purpose, gathering the items she had set aside for the birth. Clean linens stored in the chest Eric had carved during the long winter evenings. The special herbs her mother had dried and bundled, tied with red thread for luck and life. A flask of strong mead, sealed with wax and saved for this occasion. Each item found its place near the hearth, arranged with the same precision she had once used to lay out her weapons before battle. The hearthstone's heat wrapped around her like a protective embrace, its ancient presence a reminder that she was not the first woman to face birth alone, nor would she be the last. The village midwife lived half a day's walk away, across terrain made treacherous by the storm. Even if someone could be sent for her now, the journey would be too dangerous in the darkness. Astrid had helped at enough births to know the signs. This child would not wait for morning. Another pain gripped her, stronger this time. She braced herself against the hearthstone, feeling the familiar ridges and grooves beneath her palms. How many other women had done the same, seeking strength from this ancient anchor at the heart of the home? The stone held memories of all of them, their stories etched invisibly into its surface, alongside the visible marks of fire and time. In the corner, Eric's chair stood empty, the sheepskin throw still draped across it exactly as he had left it. She had not been able to bring herself to move it, as if maintaining these small details could somehow preserve the fiction that he would return. Now, as the pains began to establish their rhythm, she found herself grateful for these unchanged pieces of him. The hearthstone radiated steady warmth against her back as she settled into position, gathering furs and blankets around herself. Above, the smoke hole in the roof offered a glimpse of the night sky, where stars were beginning to emerge from the storm clouds. She searched for the star patterns Eric had taught her, the celestial marks by which he had navigated, but the sky seemed different now, as if the very constellations had shifted with his passing. A more intense contraction wrapped around her, and Astrid pressed her hands flat against the hearthstone, drawing on its ancient strength. The stone had witnessed the birth of Eric himself and his father before him, going back through generations. Of his family, now it would witness the birth of his child, a child who would never know its father's laugh, never learn to read the stars from his patient instruction. But first, she would have to survive this night. The warmth of the hearthstone seeped into her tired muscles as another contraction built, reminding her that she was not truly alone. The strength of her ancestors, both her own and Eric's, lived in this stone, in these walls, in her very blood. She would need all of it before dawn broke. Between contractions, Astrid's fingers found the bone comb in her belt pouch, its smooth surface worn to a gentle luster by generations of women's hands. Her grandmother had given it to her on her wedding. One day, the yellowed bone etched deep with protective runes and interwoven with delicate patterns of wolves and ravens, Odin's creatures, watching over those who carried their images. A woman's power lives in her hair, her grandmother had told her, demonstrating how each rune should be traced before combing. When you bind it for battle or birth, you bind to you the strength of all the women who came before. The old woman's fingers had been gnarled with age, but they had moved with surprising grace as they worked through Astrid's thick blonde braids. Now, as another contraction gripped her, Astrid began the ritual her grandmother had taught her. First, she untangled her storm-whipped hair, letting it fall loose around her shoulders. The comb moved through the strands with practiced ease, each stroke accompanied by the whispered names of her forebears. Helga, shield-bearer of the northern gates, she murmured, beginning with her grandmother. Sigrid, who bore twins in a snowstorm. The names had power, each one a thread in the tapestry of her lineage. Gyda, who led the defense of the village while the men were at sea. Hilda, who birthed 5 sons and lived to see them all become chieftains. With each name she felt their presence grow stronger, as if the very air in the longhouse was filling with invisible witnesses. The bone comb moved steadily, gathering her hair into the traditional birth braids, one for strength, one for protection, one for safe passage. The runes carved into the comb seemed to pulse with a subtle warmth against her fingertips. Another contraction seized her, stronger than the last. She gripped the comb tightly, feeling the wolf patterns press into her palm. Her grandmother had survived childbirth 6 times, the last at an age when most women were beyond bearing. Sigrid, her great-grandmother, had delivered her youngest alone in a blizzard. Their blood ran in her veins, their strength in her bones. The wind outside changed its tone, dropping to a low moan that seemed to carry words just beyond understanding. In the old stories, it was said that the ancestors could speak through the winter winds, offering guidance to those who knew how to listen. Astrid had always considered such tales to be the fancy of old women, until now. She worked the comb through another section of hair, weaving in strands of red thread blessed by the village vulva. Astrid Eriksdottir, she heard, or thought. She heard in the wind's voice. It sounded like her grandmother, though she had been 5 winters in her grave. Your body knows the way. Trust in the old blood. The bone comb caught the firelight as she sectioned off the final braid. The carved ravens seemed to shift and move in the flickering light, their ancient eyes watching her work. How many women had held this comb in times of trial? How many had drawn comfort from its familiar weight, its time-smooth surface? Another pain racked her body, and she found herself clutching the comb like a talisman. The names of her ancestors became a chant, a rhythm to match her laboring breath. Each woman's story contained a lesson in endurance, in the quiet strength that had nothing to do with weapons or warfare. Through the smoke hole, she caught glimpses of clouds racing across the night sky. Her grandmother had taught her to read the weather in such movements, to see the patterns that pointed toward change. Something was shifting up there, the storm, clouds parting to reveal brief flashes of starlight. The bone comb had survived countless winters, passed from mother to daughter in an unbroken chain that stretched back to the time of legends. Its runes had absorbed the prayers and hopes of generations, each woman adding her own story to its power. Now it would witness another birth, another link forged in that ancient chain. Astrid finished the last braid, securing it with a length of blessed thread. Her grandmother's voice seemed to whisper again on the wind. The comb knows the way. Let it guide your hands as it guided ours. She tucked the sacred object back into her pouch, feeling its reassuring presence against her hip. The next contraction was building, but she was ready now, her hair bound with prayers and power, her spirit strengthened by the touch of ancient bone against living flesh. The ancestors were with her, their presence as real as the hearth's warmth. Their wisdom carried in the runes of a yellowed comb that had seen countless nights like this one. She was not alone in her labor. She was part of something far older and stronger than herself, a lineage of women who had faced the threshold between life and death with nothing but their courage and their faith in the old ways. The birth bowl sat ready by the hearth, its ancient wood gleaming dully in the firelight. 9 generations of Eric's family had been washed in its carved depths, their first cries echoing against its well-worn sides. The bowl's rim bore the marks of countless hands, smooth hollows worn by fingers, gripping in the throes of labor. Astrid reached for it now, needing its solid presence as another contraction seized her. The wood felt alive under her touch, warm despite the night's chill, as if all the births it had witnessed had seeped into its very grain. Inside, the water she had blessed with 9 drops of mead waited, small herbs floating on its surface like stars on a dark sea. "With this water we welcome new life," she whispered the traditional words, her voice tight with pain. "With this bowl we hold the future." The contraction peaked, drawing a low moan from deep within her chest. Unlike the previous pains, this one demanded her full attention, consuming every thought in its fierce grip. When it passed, she dipped her fingers in the bowl's blessed water, marking her forehead with the sign of protection her mother had taught her. The herbs released their subtle fragrance, mugwort for strength, yarrow for healing, juniper for protection. Each had been gathered under the proper moon, dried with prayers, and kept safe for this moment. Another pain built swiftly, barely giving her time to brace herself. She clutched the bowl's rim, feeling the generations of grip marks beneath her fingers. How many women had held this same position, finding anchor in this ancient vessel? The wood seemed to pulse with their collected strength, their accumulated wisdom. Through the blur of pain, she noticed something had changed in the air. The fire's smoke, instead of rising straight through the roof hole, began to curl and dance in unusual patterns. It reminded her of the stories the old women told, of how the smoke would sometimes form shapes to reveal a child's destiny. The contraction released its grip gradually, leaving her breathing heavily. She reached again for the birth bowl, this time to wet a cloth and cool her face. The water felt different now, more vital somehow, as if the herbs had awakened something, ancient in its depths. As she wrung out the cloth, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the dark surface. Behind her own image, she could have sworn she saw other faces, women with familiar features and eyes that held generations of knowledge. Time began to lose its meaning, measured now only by the rhythm of her body's demands. Between pains, she tended the fire, added fresh herbs to the bowl, and whispered the old prayers. During each contraction, she gripped the bowl's rim and let its ancient strength flow into her. The wooden vessel had seen countless nights like this, had held the first waters of hundreds of new lives. The bowl had been old even when Eric's grandmother had used it. Legend said it had been carved from a single piece of oak struck by lightning, blessed by a Velva who had seen 9 generations into the future. Whether the story was true didn't matter now. What mattered was the tangible history in her hands, the physical connection to all the mothers who had come before. A particularly strong contraction caught her off guard, forcing her to her knees beside the hearth. This time, when she clutched the bowl's rim, she felt something different, a subtle vibration as if the wood itself was humming with power. The herbs in the water began to move in patterns that had nothing to do with her trembling hands. As the pain peaked, she heard voices in the steam rising from the bowl, whispered encouragements, gentle instructions, the accumulated wisdom of centuries of birthing women. They spoke of positioning, of breathing, of letting her body lead the way. These were not the pain-born hallucinations she had been warned about, but something older and more real. The knowledge stored in the very fiber of this sacred vessel, released now in her hour of need. When the contraction finally eased, Astrid dipped her cloth in the bowl once more. The water felt charged now, tingling against her skin like the air before a lightning strike. Her child moved within her, strong and insistent, and she knew with sudden certainty that the ancient birth bowl would soon serve its purpose once again, welcoming another life into the long line it had witnessed since time out of mind. The first ribbons of green light appeared through the smoke hole, just as Astrid's strongest contraction yet began to fade. She reached for the aurora crystal that hung from a leather cord around her neck, a rare stone Eric had found on his northern travels, its clouded depths seeming to capture and hold the very essence of the skyfires. Through its translucent surface, the northern lights appeared to dance and multiply, each band of color fracturing into 1,000 smaller streams. The old ones said such crystals were tears of the Valkyries, frozen in their fall from Odin's great hall. Eric had believed the stone would protect their child, ensuring it was born under favorable signs. Now the crystal pulsed with an inner light that matched the rhythm of the aurora above. Green and gold ribbons twisted across the night sky, casting an otherworldly glow through the smoke hole. The light painted the longhouse walls with shifting patterns, making the carved posts seem to move and breathe in their ancient dance. A contraction gripped her with sudden force, and as she clutched the crystal, its usually cool surface felt warm against her palm. The aurora's light seemed to pour through it directly into her flesh, filling her with a strange, wild energy. The Valkyries were said to ride forth on such nights, choosing the worthy from among the fallen. Had they carried Eric's soul to Valhalla beneath such lights? The thought brought not grief, but a fierce pride. Above her, the lights began to shift from green to deep red, the color of blood, of life, of battles won and lost. The crystal in her hand throbbed with each new wave of color, its inner structure seeming to reshape itself with every pulse of the aurora. Through the stone's depths, she caught glimpses of things that couldn't be real. Mounted warriors riding across the sky, their spears trailing fire. Great ships sailing on seas of light, women in shimmering mail, calling out in voices that sang in her blood. The crystal had never shown such visions before, but this was a night for mysteries, for the thinning of veils between worlds. Another pain took her, stronger than any before. She pressed the crystal to her belly, feeling its warmth spread through her tired muscles. The aurora's light filled the longhouse now, painting everything in supernatural hues, even the hearth. Fire seemed to dance differently, its flames reaching up to touch the ribbons of light that streamed through the smoke hole. The crystal caught and held each color as it passed, green for life, blue for wisdom, purple for power, red for birth. And battled both. Inside its depths, the lights wove patterns that spoke of things beyond mortal understanding. This was the magic of the North, raw and wild and older than the gods themselves. Time lost all meaning as Astrid labored beneath the dancing lights. The crystal guided her breathing, its pulses matching the rhythm of her body's demands. When a contraction peaked, she would focus on the stone's inner fire, letting it draw her mind away from the pain and into the vast dance taking place above. In those moments, she felt connected to something greater than herself, to the ancient powers that had shaped these lands, to the warriors and mothers who had come before, to Eric's spirit riding with the Valkyries through the curtains of light. The crystal grew warmer still, until it felt like holding a piece of the aurora itself. The stone had been a wedding gift, chosen for its unusual clarity and the way it seemed to hold light within its heart. Now she understood its true purpose, not just as a protective charm, but as a bridge between worlds on this night when she stood at the threshold between life and death, between ending and beginning. As another contraction built, Astrid held the crystal up to the smoke hole, watching the aurora's light pour through it like liquid fire. The ancient voices grew stronger, singing of courage and endurance, of battles fought in blood and pain, of victory seized from the very jaws of death. She was a shield maiden still, and this was her greatest battle yet. The birthing rope hung from the central beam, its braided length dark with age and smooth from the grip of countless hands. 9 strands of hemp had been woven together with strips of hide from a sacrificial bull, each twist accompanied by prayers to Frigg, protector of women in childbirth. The rope had served Eric's family for 5 generations, its fibers storing the strength and determination of every woman who had ever grasped it. Astrid reached for it now, as the strongest contraction yet tore through her body. The rope felt alive in her hands, warm and supple despite its age, as if the hopes and fears of all those mothers still pulsed within its twisted core. Her fingers found the familiar knots tied at intervals, each one representing a prayer, a promise, a path, through pain to victory. "Blood of my blood," she gasped, reciting the ancient words as another contraction built, "honor of my line." The rope creaked softly as she pulled herself upright, letting her weight hang from its trusted strength. Above, the aurora's light painted the braided strands in shifting colors, making the old fibers glow like living things. The village midwife had taught her the rope's secrets during her preparation time, showing her how each knot corresponded to a different stage of labor. "When you reach the warrior's knot," the old woman had said, "you'll know it's time." Now Astrid's fingers found that very knot, worn smooth by generations of desperate grips, and she knew she had entered the final battle. Her warrior's training had taught her about pain, how to embrace it, how to use it, how to ride its currents like a ship on storm-tossed seas. But this was different. This pain had purpose, had power, had a rhythm as old as the earth itself. The rope guided her through each wave, its twisted strands absorbing her cries just as they had absorbed the cries of mothers long passed into legend. Between contractions, she became aware of movement in the shadows of the longhouse. The aurora's light revealed glimpses of figures that couldn't be there. Women in ancient dress, their faces bearing familiar features of Eric's family line. They seemed to gather around her, their hands ghosting over the rope, adding their strength to its fibers. "Stand fast, shield sister," she heard, or thought she heard, in voices that whispered like wind through dried grass. "The greatest battles bring the greatest honors." The rope hummed with their presence, each strand singing with the power of mothers who had faced this trial before her. Another contraction seized her, and Astrid wrapped the rope around her forearms, letting it take her full weight. The knots pressed into her palms like runes of power, each one a reminder of the women who had passed this way before. She was not just fighting for herself now, but for all of them, for the honor of her line, for the future of Eric's blood. The aurora's light intensified, pouring through the smoke hole in curtains of green and gold. It caught the rope's fibers, making them glitter like threads of fate woven by the Norns themselves. In that supernatural illumination, Astrid could see the rope's true nature, not just hemp and hide, but a bridge between worlds, a link in the chain of life that stretched back to the first mothers of her people. The pain peaked again, drawing. A cry that was half battle shout, half prayer. The rope seemed to answer, its fibers warming beneath her grip, pulsing with the collected strength of generations. This was why the old ways persisted, not just tradition, but power, real and tangible in moments of greatest need. Through the haze of effort, she became aware of something changing. The rope's energy was shifting, gathering, focusing like sunlight through ice. The ghostly women drew closer, their presence more tangible now, their voices rising in a chant that seemed to come from the rope itself. "Push, daughter," they sang. "Push with the strength of your mothers, with the courage of your line." The warrior's knot grew warm beneath her fingers, and suddenly Astrid understood its true purpose. This was the moment when a mother became a warrior, when the boundaries between giving life and fighting death disappeared. The rope had guided countless women through this battle, and now it would guide her. She drew herself up, muscles trembling, with effort, and wrapped the rope once more around her arms. The aurora painted her in its wild colors, turning sweat to liquid fire on her skin. This was her moment, her battle, her chance to add her strength to the rope's ancient power. Above her, the spirits of mothers past raised their voices in the old songs of birthing, their words carried on the rope's twisting strands like flames running through dry timber. The silver bell lay waiting in its velvet pouch, its surface etched with runes of welcome and protection. For centuries, its clear tone had announced new life in the village, its voice carrying across the fjord to alert the community that a child had entered the world. Eric had polished it himself when they learned of the pregnancy, ensuring its surface gleamed like moonlight on snow. Now, as Astrid felt the final moments of labor approaching, the bell seemed to vibrate in sympathy with her efforts, its silver surface catching and amplifying the aurora's wild light. The runes along its rim began to glow with an inner fire, each ancient symbol awakening to its purpose. The pain came in waves now, relentless as the tide that had claimed Eric's ship. But where those waters had taken life, these waves would bring it forth. Astrid braced herself against the birthing rope, her entire world narrowing to this singular purpose. The ghostly women who had gathered around her raised their voices in the ancient birthing song, their words weaving through the aurora's curtains of light. "The child comes," they whispered, their voices like wind through winter branches. "The bell awaits its first song." The silver artifact pulsed with each contraction now, its metal singing in harmony with the power flowing through the longhouse. This was the moment it had been crafted for, when the veil between worlds grew thin enough for new life to slip through. With a cry that echoed off the ancient timbers, Astrid felt her body surge with one final tremendous effort. The aurora above blazed suddenly brighter, its light pouring through the smoke hole like liquid fire. In that moment of transformation, as her child emerged into the world, the bell began to ring of its own accord. Its clear tone cut through the night, pure and perfect as starlight. The sound seemed to freeze time itself, a single, crystalline note that held within it all the joy and pain of bringing life into the world. The spectral mothers gathered closer, their forms more solid now in the bell's silver light, their hands reaching out in welcome. The child's first cry joined the bell's song, strong and defiant. A boy, Astrid saw through tears of exhaustion and triumph. A son who carried Eric's blood, born under the same lights that might have guided his father's soul to Valhalla. She lifted him to her breast, feeling his strong heartbeat against her own. The bell's ringing grew stronger, its voice carrying, not just across the fjord, but seemingly across the boundary between worlds. The ghostly women added their voices to its song, a chorus of welcome that made the very air shimmer with power. Through the bell's harmonics, Astrid thought she heard other sounds. The clash of shields in Valhalla, the cry of ravens, the distant sound of oars cutting through starlit waters. As she cleaned and swaddled her son, the bell's tone gradually softened, becoming a gentle benediction. Its runes still glowed with inner fire, marking this moment as one of power and significance. This was more than just the birth of a child. It was the continuation of a line, the fulfillment of a promise, the beginning of a new saga. The spectral mothers moved forward one by one, each touching the bell lightly before fading back into the aurora's light. With each touch, the bell chimed softly, adding their blessing to its song. Last came a figure Astrid recognized from the carved posts of the family tree, Eric's grandmother, her eyes bright with pride and promise. "The bell has sung for generations," the spirit whispered, her voice clear despite its otherworldly tone. "It will sing for generations more." Your son's voice joins an ancient chorus. She touched the bell one final time, drawing forth a note that seemed to contain all the wisdom and strength of the ancestors. As the aurora's light began to fade, Astrid reached for the bell with trembling fingers. Its surface was warm to her touch, humming with the power it had channeled. Following tradition, she rang it 3 times, once for the child, once for the mother, and once for those who had gone before. The clear tones rolled out across the fjord, carrying their message of new life to any who might be waiting in the pre-dawn darkness. The bell's song spoke of courage and endurance, of life continuing despite loss, of hope burning bright as the stars above. In its silver voice, Astrid heard the promise of tomorrow, the strength of yesterday, and the fierce joy of a moment when past and future met in perfect harmony. The dawn banner hung limp in the early morning air, its red wool dulled by the grey light of approaching day. For generations, this signal flag had served as the village's silent messenger, raised high to call for aid, to announce celebrations, or to warn of danger. Now, as Astrid gathered her strength after the night's labours, she knew she must somehow find the energy to raise it. Her son slept peacefully at her breast, his small face still bearing the otherworldly glow of one who had passed recently through the veil. The spectral mothers had faded with the aurora, leaving behind only the faintest whisper of their presence in the cooling air of the longhouse. Reality was asserting itself again, bringing with it all the practical concerns of a new mother alone. With her child, The banner had been Eric's pride, its fabric carefully maintained despite years of weather and wind. He had added the runes himself: protection, strength, community, each one stitched with careful attention to the old ways. Now those same runes would serve a different purpose, calling the village to witness not a husband's return, but a son's arrival. With careful movements, Astrid wrapped her child warmly and secured him in a sling across her chest. Every motion sent waves of exhaustion through her body, reminding her of the night's incredible efforts. But she was still a shield maiden, trained to push through pain and fatigue when duty called. The banner must be raised. The morning air bit at her face as she stepped outside, its harsh clarity washing away the last traces of the night's mysteries. The banner's pole stood tall against the lightening sky, its shadow stretching long across the frost-rimed ground. 9 knots marked the rope that would lift the signal, one for each of the worlds in Norse cosmology. Her fingers, stiff with cold and exhaustion, worked the first knot. "For Midgard," she whispered, remembering Eric's teachings about the significance of each one. The second knot for Asgard, home of the gods. The third for Vanaheim, realm of wisdom. Each knot raised the banner a little higher, its red fabric beginning to stir in the morning breeze. The child stirred against her chest, making small sounds of hunger or dream. His warmth gave her strength as she continued the ritual, working through each knot with determined precision. The banner climbed slowly skyward, gradually catching more of the strengthening wind. By the 7th knot, it had begun to snap and wave, its message becoming clear to any watching eyes. Near the top, she found the knot Eric had added himself, a complex pattern that made the banner flutter in a distinctive way, unique to their family line. The sight of his handiwork brought fresh grief, but also pride. Their son would grow up, knowing his father's skill, his attention to detail, his respect for the old ways. Finally, the banner reached its full height, streaming out against the pearl-grey sky. Its red fabric seemed to catch fire as the first true rays of sunrise struck it, the stitched runes blazing with momentary glory. In that instant, Astrid felt, again, the touch of the otherworldly, as if the banner's light was answering the memory of the night's aurora. From the village below came the first signs of awakening: smoke from morning fires, the distant bark of dogs, the creak of opening doors. Soon they would see the banner's signal, would know that within this house a child had come into the world during the night's darkest hours. They would come, bringing help and congratulations, ending the solitude of her long vigil. But for now, Astrid stood alone in the dawn light, her son warm against her heart, watching the banner that had served so many purposes through the years. It seemed to her that the wind shaped it differently now, molding the fabric into forms that spoke of new beginnings rather than endings, of hope rather than loss. The banner would fly until sunset, announcing to all that life continued, that the old blood still flowed strong, that even in the depths of grief and solitude, new light could dawn. Like the child in her arms, it was both an ending and a beginning, a thread connecting past to future through the eternal present of this crystal-clear morning. The search horn's deep voice rolled across the fjord, its ancient bronze throat giving voice to generations of need. 3 long calls, the traditional signal for aid, echoed off the cliff faces, drawing answers from other horns in the village below. Astrid recognized the distinctive tone of Bjorn's horn, then Harald's, and finally old Sigurd's, each one acknowledging the call and promising help to come. She had barely managed to return to her bed when the first horn sounded, her body finally surrendering to the bone-deep exhaustion of birth and grief combined. Her son nursed contentedly, seemingly unaware of the mounting activity his arrival had sparked. Through heavy eyes, she watched the morning light strengthen, bringing with it the sounds of a community mobilizing. The search horn had hung beside their door for 5 years, its surface marked with the patina of age and use. Eric had inherited it from his father, who had received it from his father before him. Its voice had called men to ships, warned of approaching storms, celebrated victories, and mourned losses. Now it called the village to witness new life, even as they still grieved for the old. Bjorn arrived first, his massive frame filling the doorway as he stamped snow from his boots. The horn at his belt, smaller than the great bronze one by the door, still gleamed with frost from his answering call. His wife Helga followed close behind, her arms laden with clean linens and herbs, her experienced eyes already assessing, both mother and child. The horn called, and we answered, Bjorn said simply, moving to stoke the fire without being asked. It was the old way. No unnecessary words, just ready hands and willing hearts when the horn spoke of need. Helga was already arranging her supplies, her movements sure and practiced from attending countless births. More villagers arrived as the morning deepened, each one carrying something useful: food, firewood, medicines. The horns had done their work well, spreading the word of both celebration and necessity. Each arrival touched the great horn by the door, a gesture of respect for the ancient signals that bound their community together. Astrid drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of gentle hands tending to her and her son, of quiet conversations and careful movements. The search horn's voice had summoned not just help but tradition, the complex web of obligations and care that had sustained their people through countless winters. She woke fully to find Sigurd, the village's eldest member, standing beside her bed. His own horn, carved from an ancient aurochs horn and banded with silver, hung at his side. "I heard both songs," he said softly, his gnarled hand gentle on her forehead. "The bell in the night singing of birth, and the horn at dawn, calling us to your aid. Both voices speak of strength." The child stirred, and Sigurd's eyes brightened with interest. "A son," he noted, "born under the lights of the ancestors. The horns will sing different songs for him as he grows, calling him to his first hunt, his first raid, his place among the men of the village." The old man's words carried the weight of prophecy, born from decades of watching the patterns of their lives unfold. Through the open door, Astrid could see more villagers arriving, their breath steaming in the cold air as they answered the horn's call. Each brought something different: skills, supplies, stories, songs. This was why their people had survived the harsh northern lands for so long, why they would continue to survive. The horn's voice bound them together, reminding them of their obligations to each other. Helga changed the linens with practiced efficiency, her movements accompanied by soft humming, an old song about horns calling warriors home across storm-tossed seas. The melody carried echoes of older times, when the great bronze horns had guided ships through fog and darkness, their voices bearing messages of warning or welcome across the waters. As the day grew stronger, the horns fell silent. Their work complete, but their echo lived on in the steady stream of help and comfort that flowed into the longhouse. The search horn had called, and the village had answered, bringing with them all the strength and support that Astrid and her newborn son would need in the days to come. The ice pike sang as it struck the frozen surface, its iron head biting deep into treacherous ground. Harold tested each strike carefully, the tool's ancient shaft transmitting vital information through his experienced hands. The pike had guided his grandfather safely across these same waters in winters past, its iron voice speaking of thick ice, thin ice, and hidden dangers beneath the crystalline surface. Through the morning mist, a line of villagers followed his lead, each carrying their own pike passed down through generations. Their breath frosted in the air as they worked to forge a safe path between village and longhouse, testing each step, with the wisdom carved into their tools' weathered hafts. The pikes were more than simple tools, they were survival given form in iron and oak. Each one bore the marks of past challenges, notches recording the depths of legendary winters, runes of protection hammered into the metal when it was still. Glowing from the forge, worn spots on the handles, where countless hands had gripped in desperate moments. "The ice is strange this year," Harold called back to the others, feeling an odd resonance through his pike. "The storm has changed its voice." The iron head seemed to hum with each strike, as if responding to some deeper disturbance in the frozen fjord. Perhaps it remembered other storms, other losses, other times when the sea had claimed its own. Behind him came Gunnar, the village blacksmith, who had reforged many of these pikes over the years. His own tool was the oldest among them, its iron head, traced with patterns that spoke of ancient crafting techniques, now lost to time. The pike seemed to guide his feet of its own accord, drawing on memories older than any living smith. The column of villagers moved steadily onward, their pikes working in concert to probe and test the ice. Each strike revealed another secret. Here a thin spot to be marked and avoided, there a solid path that would bear their weight. The tools sang together, a chorus of iron voices rising from the frozen surface of the fjord. Young Eric, named for his uncle now lost to the sea, struggled slightly with his father's pike. The tool was still too long for his 13 winters, but he struck the ice with determined precision, learning its songs as generations had before him. The older men watched approvingly. This was how knowledge passed, how survival skills were honed. A sharp crack echoed across the ice, and everyone froze. Harold's pike had found a weakness, a hidden flaw that could have spelled disaster for anyone crossing unaware. The iron head quivered in his hands, transmitting warnings through its length. This was why the pikes were so precious, why they were passed down with such care. They didn't just test the ice, they spoke to those who knew how to listen. "Mark it well," Harold commanded, and red cloth was tied to a nearby stake, another tradition born of bitter experience. The pike had saved lives countless times this way, finding dangers that eyes alone could never spot. Each warning added to the tool's wisdom, became part of its story. The morning wore on as they forged their path, each pike strike bringing them closer to their goal. The tools never tired, never complained, never failed to warn of danger. They had been crafted for exactly this purpose, to guide their people safely through the treacherous months when ice made bridges of the waters and death waited beneath crystalline beauty. Near the shore where ice met stone, the pikes found firmer footing. Their song changed, became more confident, speaking of solid ground ahead. The iron head struck sparks from hidden rocks, marking the transition from frozen water to frozen earth. This, too, was recorded in the tool's memory, where safety began, where danger ended. Finally, the path was complete, a safe route marked and tested, ready to bear traffic between village and longhouse. The pikes had done their work well, as they had for generations. Each one would be cleaned, oiled, and stored carefully until needed again, their iron voices waiting to sing new songs of survival. Harold gathered the younger ones around him, their pikes planted firmly in the ice. "Listen well," he told them, tapping his own tool shaft. "Each mark, each notch, each worn spot tells a story. These pikes remember every winter they've faced, every life they've saved. They speak to us of ice and iron, of danger and deliverance. Your children's children will hold these same hafts, strike these same heads against unknown ice. Learn their songs now that you may teach them then." The old pike in his hands seemed to hum in agreement, its iron voice carrying the wisdom of ages. Tomorrow it would guide the midwife safely across the ice. In days to come, it would lead others along the marked path, each strike adding to its store of knowledge, each journey becoming part of its continuing saga of survival in these harsh northern lands. The healing herbs filled the longhouse with their ancient fragrance as Margaret, the village midwife, spread them on the table. Her medicine bag, worn, smooth by decades of urgent journeys, yielded bundles wrapped in careful order. Mugwort for strength, yarrow for bleeding, angelica for protection. Each plant had been gathered in its proper time, dried with prayers, and stored with songs of power handed down through generations of wise women. "You did well," she told Astrid, her gnarled fingers moving with practiced grace as she prepared an infusion. "The ancestors guided your hands true." The midwife had crossed the ice at first light, following the path marked by Harold's pike crew, her bag of herbs clutched close like a sacred treasure. Steam rose from the brewing herbs, carrying with it scents that spoke of Earth's deep wisdom. Margaret had learned each plant's secret from her mother, who had learned from her mother before her, back through time to when the first healers had discovered which leaves brought sleep, which roots eased pain, which flowers sparked life's renewal. The child nursed contentedly while his mother sipped the strengthening tea. Margaret watched them both with knowing eyes, her hands automatically sorting through her herbs, checking each bundle with the precision born of long practice. "Your grandmother would be proud," she said softly. "She helped me gather many of these herbs, taught me some of their songs herself." From a special pocket in her bag came the rarest herbs, those gathered only by moonlight or found in secret places known to few. These she handled with particular reverence, measuring small portions, with a bone spoon that had served 3 generations of healers. The plants knew her, seemed to release their virtue more readily at her touch. "Here," she said, holding out a sprig of dark leaves. "Smell, but don't touch." The herb's fragrance was sharp and clean, carrying memories of high mountain peaks, where snow never fully melted. "From the Eagle's Nest Cliff," she explained, "for strength in darkness, for finding one's way home." She added it to the simmering pot, murmuring words in an older tongue. More villagers arrived as the morning deepened, each bringing their own healing gifts. Helga contributed dried berries rich in iron, Gudrun brought honey from her precious hives, and Sigurd offered rare spices traded from southern lands. Each addition was examined by Margaret's experienced eye, then incorporated into her healing brews with appropriate blessings. The midwife's herbs worked their magic gradually. Color returned. To Astrid's cheeks, her eyes grew brighter, and her milk came in strong and rich. The child thrived, his lusty cries speaking of healthy lungs and vigorous spirit. Margaret nodded in satisfaction as she packed and repacked her bundles, each herb returning to its proper place in the ancient bag. "These plants remember," she told the watching women, her voice carrying the weight of accumulated wisdom. "They remember the first mothers, the first births, the first songs of life and healing. When we gather them with respect, when we speak the old words and follow the old ways, they share their memories with us." She brought out a final bundle, wrapped in soft leather and tied with red thread. Inside lay herbs even Astrid had never seen before, their colors strange and wonderful. "From the high valleys," Margaret explained, "where the trolls are said to dance in summer twilight. These are for remembrance, for holding close those who have passed beyond our reach." The scent that rose from these mysterious plants was like nothing in the normal world, somehow both sweet and sharp, carrying hints of spring growth and autumn decay, of joy and sorrow, mingled in perfect measure. Astrid breathed it in, and for a moment felt Eric's presence as clearly as if he stood beside her. "Keep these close," the midwife instructed, rewrapping the precious herbs with careful movements. "When grief grows too heavy, when the night seems too long, let their fragrance remind you that love, like these plants, puts down roots too deep for any storm to tear away." As the day wore on, Margaret continued her gentle work, moving between mother and child with quiet efficiency. Her herb bag remained close at hand, each bundle ready to yield its healing power as needed. This was how their people had survived. The harsh northern lands, through knowledge passed down, through plants that remembered, through wise hands that knew how to call forth the earth's ancient strength when it was most needed. The namestone sat heavy in Astrid's hands, its surface still rough where new runes would soon be carved. Generations of names marked its ancient face, each one cut deep into the granite by fathers who had stood where she now stood. But Eric was not here to carve their son's name, and so the task fell to her. Another tradition bent by necessity, another way that grief reshaped their world. Sigurd had brought the stone at dawn, carrying it wrapped in ceremonies older than the village itself. Its weight spoke of permanence, of connections that ran deeper than blood or memory. Every child born to Eric's line had their name carved. Here their first cry echoed in eternal stone. The name stone remembers, Sigurd explained to the gathered villagers, his voice carrying the weight of his position as keeper of traditions. It remembers every child given to its care, every life added to its surface. The stone knows them all, those who died in battle, those who sailed beyond the horizon, those who lived to see their own children's names carved beside theirs. The morning sun caught the ancient runes, making them stand out in sharp relief. Astrid traced them with careful fingers. Eric's name, his father's name, all the way back to the first settler who had carried this stone across stormy seas to their new home. Each name told a story, each carving added another thread to the tapestry of their people's history. Gunnar stepped forward, his tools ready for the sacred work. As the village blacksmith, his hands knew the way of metal against stone, understood how to make permanent marks in unyielding surfaces. The naming tools had been heated in the forge at dawn, blessed with prayers as old as ironworking itself. "Speak the name," Sigurd commanded, his rich voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "Let the stone hear it first, that it may hold it true." Astrid rose carefully, her son cradled in one arm. The words came naturally, as if Eric himself whispered them in her ear. "Ericsson he is in blood, born of storm and sea's fury. But his given name shall be Bjorn, for the strength he will need, and Stormborn for the night that brought him forth." The name stone seemed to pulse beneath her hand as she spoke, as if awakening to its purpose. Gunnar's tools rang against the granite, cutting the first strokes of the name. Each strike echoed off the fjord's cliffs, calling to the ancestors, announcing the newest addition to their ancient line. Around them, the villagers added their voices in the traditional responses, words that had welcomed countless children through the years. "Bjorn Ericsson Stormborn," they chanted, "born of courage, born of loss, born of hope unending." The name stone drank in their words, as surely as it accepted Gunnar's careful cuts. As the final rune took shape beneath the smith's skilled hands, Astrid felt a change in the air. The stone grew warm to her touch, though the morning remained chill. This was the moment when name became destiny, when stone accepted soul into its keeping. All the prophecies, all the hopes, all the dreams she and Eric had shared for their child, all now bound in granite and memory. Sigurd stepped forward again, his ceremonial bowl filled with water from the sacred spring. This too was tradition, the first washing of the name, the blessing of the stone. The water caught the sunlight as it fell, seeming to dance across the fresh-cut runes. "Let all who touch this stone know," the old man intoned, "that here is carved a new branch of an ancient tree," a new voice in an endless song. The assembled villagers moved forward one by one, each adding their own blessing to the stone. Some spoke of Eric, remembering his strength and wisdom. Others offered prayers for the child's future, for the path that lay before him. The name stone accepted them all, its surface drinking in their words as it had done for countless generations. Last came Harold, who had led the ice pike crew to forge safe passage. His weathered hand traced the new runes with careful reverence. "The stone remembers," he said softly, "but it also promises. Each name carved here is a promise to the future, a bridge between what was and what will be." As the ceremony drew to a close, Astrid held her son close, letting him touch the stone that would carry his name through time. The granite was warm, now alive with the power of tradition and community. Bjorn Ericsson Stormborn, the name stone would remember him, would hold his story safe through whatever storms lay ahead. The stone would return to its place of honor in the village hall, where all could touch it, all could read the names that shaped their community. But first, Astrid pressed her lips to the fresh-cut runes, sealing her own promise to the stone. Her son would know his father through these carvings, would trace Eric's name with his own fingers, would understand that he was part of something ancient and enduring. Eric's shield hung on the longhouse wall, its surface newly decorated with the runes and symbols that would transform it from a warrior's protection to a child's inheritance. Gunnar had worked through the night, his skilled hands adding golden inlays that caught the morning light, a ship riding storm waves, the auroras, ribbons, a newborn's first cry captured in precious metal and ancient signs. The shield had been Eric's pride, carried on countless voyages, its wooden core strengthened by memories of battles won and storms weathered. Now it would serve a different purpose, becoming both memorial and promise, a physical link between father and son. The traditional words had been carved around its rim. From storm was he taken, in storm was he renewed. Astrid stood before it now, her son in her arms, watching as the village's most skilled craftsmen added the final touches to the transformation. Each symbol they added spoke of both loss and continuity, of endings transformed into beginnings. The shield seemed to glow from within, as if Eric's spirit itself blessed the work. A shield tells many stories, old Sigurd explained to the gathered witnesses, his finger tracing the new decorations. Here is the storm that took him, but here also is the light that guided his son into the world. Here is the ship that carried him to Valhalla, and here the new life that carries his blood forward. A warrior's shield becomes a legacy's foundation. The craftsman had preserved the original battle marks, the honorable scars that spoke of Eric's courage. But around them now flowed new patterns, birth runes interwoven with protection symbols, the signs of ending transformed into symbols of beginning. The shield had protected the father in life. Now it would guard the son's heritage. Bjorn stirred in his mother's arms, his small hand reaching toward the gleaming surface as if drawn by its power. The assembled villagers murmured in approval. Already the child showed warrior instincts. Already he recognized the significance of his father's legacy. The shield responded to his movement, its surface catching a stray beam of sunlight and casting it across the baby's face like a blessing. "The shield knows," Gunnar said softly, stepping back from his work. "It knows its new purpose." The blacksmith's own eyes were bright with unshed tears. He had been Eric's friend since childhood, had forged many of the fittings that still adorned the shield's face. Now his craft served to bridge the gap between what was lost and what remained. Astrid stepped forward, touching the shield's surface with her free hand. The metal was warm, alive with memories and possibilities. She could feel every nick and scratch that Eric had earned in its defense. Every story worked into its ancient wood. But now those stories had been woven into a larger tale, one that spoke of continuity rather than ending. The shield would hang here until her son was old enough to understand its meaning, old enough to learn the stories carved into its face. Each symbol would become a lesson, each pattern a connection to the father he would never know. The aurora, inlaid in gold, would remind him of the lights that danced above his birth, while the storm-tossed ship would speak of the courage that ran in his blood. "A shield such as this," Sigurd announced to the gathering, "carries more than memory. It carries obligation to the past that shaped us, to the future we must shape. Young Bjorn will grow beneath its protection, learning from its stories, drawing strength from its presence. Through this shield, Eric will teach his son, even from beyond the veil." The morning light strengthened, setting the shield's new decorations ablaze. The golden inlays caught fire, making the storm waves seem to move. The aurora appeared to dance. For a moment, the barrier between worlds seemed to thin, as if Eric himself watched his shield's transformation from his place in Valhalla's halls. Astrid held her son closer, letting him feel the shield's presence, letting its power wash over them both. This was more than memorial, more than tradition. This was continuation, the thread of life spinning forward despite death's best efforts to cut it short. The shield would stand guardian over her son's childhood, would help shape him into the man his father had dreamed he would become. When Bjorn was older, he would learn to read the shield's stories properly, would understand how each mark and symbol spoke of both endings and beginnings, of both loss and legacy. But for now, it was enough that he reached for it, enough that he seemed to recognize its significance even in his first days of life. The future map lay spread across the great table, its parchment yellowed with age but still strong, its lines speaking of generations of careful planning. Eric had updated it regularly, marking trading routes in black ink, safe harbors in blue, and dangerous shoals in red. Now Astrid added new markings of her own, guided by the village elders as they helped secure her son's inheritance. "These waters," Harold explained, his weathered finger tracing a complex pattern of currents near the fjord's mouth, "have belonged to Eric's line for 12 generations. Each father added to the knowledge, each son learned the secrets." The map was more than mere navigation aid. It was a compression of centuries of experience, a guide to both prosperity and survival. Bjorn slept peacefully in his cradle nearby as the elders continued their work. With careful strokes, Gunnar added the symbol for heir apparent next to key trading positions, marking them as the child's future right. The ink was mixed with a drop of the boy's blood, following tradition that bound inheritance to both paper and spirit. "The map guides more than ships," Sigurd reminded them, his voice carrying the weight of ancient wisdom. "It guides destinies." His gnarled hands moved to the map's edges, where mysterious symbols marked places of power, sites where the veil between worlds grew thin, where gods had walked, where magic still lingered in the northern air. Astrid watched as they worked, adding her own knowledge where appropriate. She had sailed with Eric often enough to know many of his secret routes, the hidden coves and protected anchorages that had made their trading ventures so successful. These too were marked now, preserved for her son's future use. The map seemed to come alive under their collective attention, each new marking awakening old powers. The parchment warmed slightly beneath their hands, as if responding to their purpose. This was old magic at work, the kind that lived in knowledge passed down, in wisdom preserved, in futures carefully planned. "Here," Astrid said suddenly, indicating a small cove she and Eric had discovered in their first year together. "The waters run deep but kind, and the winds always blow fair." Her finger traced the approach, and Gunnar added the marks that would guide Bjorn to this sanctuary when he was old enough to sail his father's routes. The elders nodded approvingly as she continued, sharing knowledge that even they didn't possess. Each addition made the map more complete, more powerful. This was how their people had survived and prospered, by gathering wisdom, by marking safe paths, by planning for futures beyond their own time. As they worked, other villagers added their own contributions. Fishermen marked the best spots for different seasons. Hunters noted where seals gathered on rocky shores. Traders indicated which harbors offered the fairest deals. The map grew richer, more detailed, more valuable with each addition. "Your son will read these waters as easily as others read runes," Harold promised, stepping back to survey their work. The map now bore dozens of new markings, each one a gift to the child's future. The knowledge of generations flows in his blood. This map will help him find his way to claim it. Astrid traced the coastline gently, feeling the slight ridges where countless hands had made similar gestures. How many mothers had stood thus, watching as their children's futures were marked in ink and blood? How many sons had later sailed these waters, guided by markings made before their birth? The map's edges curled slightly in the warming air, revealing glimpses of older markings beneath, layers upon layers of knowledge, each generation adding its wisdom to the whole. Some symbols were so old, their meaning had been lost, yet they remained, hinting at secrets yet to be rediscovered. "There's power in such planning," Sigurd said softly, watching the play of sunlight across the ancient parchment. "Power in knowing that we work not just for tomorrow, but for children yet unborn." Eric understood this. He sailed these waters not just for himself, but for the son he knew would follow. As if responding to his namesake's mention, Bjorn stirred in his cradle, making small sounds that drew smiles from the gathered elders. Astrid lifted him gently, carrying him to the table where his future was being drawn. Though he was too young to understand, she held him so he could see the map that would one day guide his journeys. "Look well, little one," she whispered, her voice carrying both pride and promise. These are your waters, your paths, your destiny, marked in ink and memory. Your father sailed them before you, and his father before him. They have left signs for you to follow, wisdom for you to claim. The future map seemed to glow in the strengthening daylight, its markings sharp and clear, its promise spanning generations. This was how they pushed back against loss, by planning, by preserving, by preparing paths for those who would follow. Eric's knowledge would not die with him. It would live on in ink and parchment, in blood and memory, in the son who would one day sail his father's waters. The saga stone stood tall against the dawn sky, its freshly carved surface still pale where Gunnar's tools had given voice to the tale. In accordance with tradition, the story had been carved as the moon waned, ensuring that as the new moon rose, the runes would begin their long work of remembering. This was how their people kept their histories, not just in songs and speeches, but in stone that would outlast all who gathered now to witness. Here stands the tale, Sigurd intoned, his hand resting on the stone's weathered face, of how a shield maiden faced the storm alone, of how a child came into the world beneath the dancing lights, of how loss became renewal through courage and blood. The gathered villagers murmured in response, adding their own voices to the stone's memory. The runes caught the morning light, each one carved deep enough to cast shadows that would guide future fingers seeking to read the tale. Astrid stood before them, her son cradled in her arms, seeing how Gunnar had captured every essential moment. The storm that took Eric, the aurora that guided the birth, the community that rallied to support its own. A saga stone remembers differently than men do, the old skald explained to the assembly. It remembers, without embellishment or fading, without favor or fear. What we carve here today will speak to generations yet unborn, telling them of courage in darkness, of life prevailing over death. The stone had been chosen with care, a massive slab of granite with a natural face, smooth enough for carving, but sturdy enough to withstand centuries of wind and weather. Its base had been set deep in the earth near the fjord's edge, where all who sailed these waters would see it standing sentinel over their stories. Bjorn stirred in his mother's arms, his small hand reaching toward the stone as if already trying to grasp his own story. The assembled villagers smiled at the gesture. Here was proof that the saga would continue, that the tale carved in stone was not an ending, but a beginning. "See how the runes speak," Harold said softly, tracing the intricate patterns that formed the story's heart. "Here is the storm's fury, here the aurora's blessing, here the moment when a warrior's widow became something more, a mother whose courage would echo through time." The saga stone seemed to pulse with inner warmth as the morning sun struck it, fully, making the fresh-cut runes gleam like silver threads in granite flesh. This was old magic at work, the kind that lived in stories properly told, in memories properly preserved, in courage properly honored. Astrid stepped forward, touching the stone where her own name had been carved. The granite was cool beneath her fingers, but she could feel the power of the runes, the way they had already begun their ancient work of remembering. This was how her son would know his story, not just through songs sung in the mead hall, but through words carved in living stone. "The stone speaks of ending and beginning both," Sigurd continued, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "It tells of a storm that took a husband, of a night that gave a son, of a woman who stood between death and life, and chose to carry hope forward." The runes caught the light differently now, as the sun climbed higher. Each one seemed to shift and dance, making the story come alive on the stone's face. Here was Eric's ship fighting the storm, there the aurora painting the sky, here the moment when Bjorn drew his first breath beneath those sacred lights. "But most importantly," the old man said, "the stone speaks of continuation. It tells those who will come after us that our people endure, through storm and loss, through birth and renewal, through the courage of those who refuse to let hope die." The saga stone stood proud against the sky, its shadow stretching long across the morning frosted ground. It would stand thus through countless seasons, telling its tale to all who passed this way. Traders would pause to read its runes. Children would trace its stories with wondering fingers. Skalds would draw inspiration from its eternal verses. "The stone remembers," the villagers chanted in response, their voices joining in the ancient affirmation. "The stone remembers, and through its memory we endure." Astrid held her son close as the ceremony drew to its close. The saga stone would stand guardian over his growing years, would help him understand the circumstances of his birth, would remind him always of the courage that ran in his blood. The story carved in its face was his inheritance, as surely as Eric's shield or the future map, a testament to the strength that had brought him into the world. As the villagers dispersed, she remained a moment longer, watching the play of light across the carved runes. The stone would remember what she herself might someday forget: the exact sound of the storm, the precise color of the aurora, the perfect mixture of grief and joy that had marked her son's arrival. This was why they carved their stories thus, setting them in stone that would outlast memory itself. The saga stone stood eternal sentry now, marking not an ending but a continuation. Through its runes, through its memory, through its enduring presence, the story would live on, of how love persisted past death, of how hope survived despair, of how a night of storms became a dawn of promise.